Hey, did you hear that the Canadian government just gave $90,000 to Grimes? She's already rich and successful. She's dating Elon Musk. It was trending on Twitter. A bunch of blogs picked it up. It was in the National Post. The head of the NDP, Jagmeet Singh, tweeted about it, and everybody's pretty angry. First, some background. On November 7th, Twitter user Nico Stratus posted this tweet, which is a screenshot of a Factor document showing that Crystal Math Music, which is Metric's label, received about $90,000 in funding, and next to it is Grimes' name, as well as a screenshot of Grimes' alleged net worth. And what ensued was a long Twitter thread and a lot of responses and a lot of piling on from people who said that Grimes shouldn't be getting this money. And that's where it started. A week later, on November 14th, MTL blog picked it up. 10 days later, the National Post picked it up, posting an opinion piece by Matt Gurney about it. Now, in addition to just getting some basic facts wrong, it's also littered with misinformation. 25% of the article is about Elon Musk. A very small sliver of it is just information, and then the rest of it is just speculative, misinformed, ignorant opinions. He also suggests that arts should not be publicly funded at all. 2 days later, on November 26th, Factor posted an official response, but at that point it was already much too late, and they basically just got ratioed in the comments by people calling them tone deaf, and arguing that even though the money is going to Crystal Math Music, it's just going to benefit Grimes anyway. Also on the 26th, federal leader of the New Democrat Party, Jagmeet Singh, posted that same National Post article that's basically just misinformed propaganda. And then a few hours later was on Twitch playing Among Us with AOC. And for the record, I voted NDP, but I can't say that I'm not incredibly disappointed with this turn of events. Alright, for the past 3 days I've been doing a lot of research, so let's go through point by point people's frustrations and get to the bottom of what's really happening here. Claim 1. Grimes doesn't even live in Canada anymore. So first off, Grimes actually is a qualifying citizen. She's still a citizen of Canada even though she lives in LA. But the money was approved for Crystal Math Music, which is a Canadian-only label run by Metric. The money will not go to Grimes. It will never be in her bank account. End of story. Also, Factor has a requirement that you hire Canadians. So now that Grimes is living in LA, a successful Canadian artist living abroad, she has a lot of reason to just work with local LA people. But Factor grants incentivize her to work with Canadians, creating business in Canada, and that's that. But also, do we really want to draw a line there and say that just because a Canadian artist has moved abroad to pursue their career, they're no longer eligible for Canadian arts funding? Does she stop being Canadian just because she's left? Frustration 2. She's dating Elon Musk. He's worth $130 billion. Couldn't she just get her money from him? Look, I don't like Elon Musk. I don't think billionaires should exist. I think marginal tax rates should tax him into oblivion. He has a private space force. But invoking his name in this situation, taking up 25% of a National Post article talking about Elon Musk, is a dog whistle. This is simply an attempt to tap into anger that people have about massive wealth inequality right now. But also, Matt Gurney, the guy who wrote the National Post article, says in it that he doesn't think arts should be publicly funded at all. And I'd be willing to bet that he doesn't support a marginal tax rate on billionaires, so it's kind of a little disingenuous to bring up Elon Musk here like, oh no, look what the rich people have done now. And also, if he weren't just trying to use Elon Musk to bait you, why didn't he write an article in 2015 when Grimes got a $75,000 Factor grant, or in 2016 when she got a $20,000 grant for a music video? Frustration 3. Grimes is already successful. Public funding of arts should only go to smaller, struggling artists. This is not an either-or situation. In 2019, 2,500 different projects were funded by Factor, both large and small. This is just one page of a 131-page PDF publicly available through Factor's website that lists every artist, every label, every organization, how much money they've gotten from Factor. The $90,000 label grant in question is one line of that. Many are smaller, many are bigger. This is just one that somebody on Twitter picked up on and got frustrated with because they saw Grimes' name beside the actual entity that's getting the money. Artists big and small have access to Factor money, and the money is awarded by jurors who are volunteer people like me. If I wanted to, I could go sign up to be a juror for Factor, and they do this so that it's most fair, so that artists' peers are the ones deciding where the money goes. Also, Grimes is a big artist, but there's lots of smaller artists. I don't think it makes any sense to draw an arbitrary line of success and say, at this point, we're no longer investing in Canadian art. Think of this on a global scale. You invest in artists, you help them build their careers, and when one of them starts to get successful, would it make sense to no longer give them funding, or would it makes sense to give them more funding and hit the gas so that they can build larger organizations, so they can establish larger labels and global leaders in the industry. Let's add some context to Factor's budget as well. In 2019, Factor's entire budget was $25 million. In comparison, in June of this year, when there was a massive public push to try to get the Toronto Police Department to cut their $1 billion budget, the City of Toronto voted instead to add $50 million for police body cams, which we all know they can just turn off when they want to break the law anyway. That's an increase on a whim for one city's police department of double Factor's entire annual budget, in spite of massive public pressure to do the exact opposite. Frustration 4. Lesser known, struggling artists, like me, deserve the funding more than crystal meth music. I've seen people online say, why give $90,000 to one cause when you could give $1,000 to 90 artists? A Factor grant is not a blank check. It is a reimbursement at a certain percentage, 50 to 75%, for expenses relating to a project. This means that I will go out and spend my money on things like
production, recording, engineers, producers, videos, touring, showcases, advertising, or artwork.
You don't pay your rent with it. You don't buy groceries with it. You don't even buy a tour van or gear or an interface or a laptop to make your art with it. To direct you to Factor's website again, they even have a list of things that you can't spend the money on, and this is fun because the lowest item on the list is alcohol. Let's even say that Crystal Math gets a $90,000 grant, and they're being reimbursed at, say, 75% on the high end for all of it. Well, they're going to have to spend $120,000 and then turn in receipts and turn in bank statements showing that they've spent it on things related to the project, and then months later, once all the expenses are approved, they will get back their $90,000. It's also worth mentioning that major label artists are not eligible for Factor funding. Factor and other grants also has the effect of allowing artists to create big budget projects that require lots of money up front without having to sign away 80% of their royalties in order to get an advance from a label. This allows artists like me to remain independent and still be able to fund projects without having to sign away all of my royalties later, just so that I can get cash up front to create the project in the first place. But let's look at the smaller artist. If you're struggling to get by and you need $1,000 to get through the month, you literally can't afford a Factor grant, and as such, there is no reason for you to apply. If you got $1,000 and you're struggling to pay rent, you don't have the money to spend to get reimbursed for up to 75% of your expenses. And to the conservatives like magurney of the National Post, who argue that it's the struggling artists who need the money to get by, especially in these difficult times, maybe it's worth considering not opposing the COVID relief benefits that struggling people actually need to get by. Frustration 5. $90,000 is a lot of my tax money. Again, Factor is a public-private partnership, and that money isn't just coming from your tax dollars, though of course some of it is. But let's take a step back here and bear with me because I know it's difficult financial times for a lot of people. $90,000 isn't a lot of money for a creative project. The cheapest I can make a music video for if I want to involve between 1 and 3 other people is about $5,000. That's one music video. Now, a real high-budget music video that can make careers on an international level, like the one Grimes has, those videos can easily cost you $20,000 to $40,000 and up dollars. And that's for one video. That doesn't take into account any of the other expenses for an album. With larger artists, there's also a snowball effect. For example, once Drake got mainstream success, he received a $300,000 grant from Ontario's Ministry of Tourism and used it to start OVO Fest, which then brings in tourism money on top of the money going directly to the music industry. Having top-tier local talent brings money into venues, booking agents, publishers, and all kinds of other local businesses who don't get paid directly from artist and label grants. Frustration 6. You don't like Grimes' music. If you look at one of these threads on Twitter, you're going to see a lot of people going off on Grimes just because they don't like her music, they didn't think she was making music anymore, or some other ridiculous, undercutting, snide remarks like that. And also, it doesn't matter if you like Grimes' music. Lots of people do. It's commercially successful. And we don't decide government policy based on your personal tastes in music. Those are generally the concerns that I've seen people have online, but I also want to talk about my own personal experience with grants because I'm a Factor-funded artist. So I've been Factor funded since September of 2016, and I need to tell you, this money doesn't go to me. I don't get to keep any of it. Actually, to be honest, it's been a little frustrating since 2016 to watch so many tens of thousands of dollars just go into my account and then straight back out. So where does all this money go? The Factor money that I get goes towards people who help me create projects. My manager, other artists, video creators, choreographers, musicians, photographers, illustrators and other visual artists, designers, touring, marketing, PR. Remember, if Factor puts $75 in my bank account, it's because I've already spent between $100 and $150. So it's only even helping me cover a portion of the costs. I've even been in situations where I can't afford to unlock my entire grant. But I am required by Factor to hire Canadians, so I'm employing people. The creatives that I work with get paid. It helps grow my career, but it does not support me financially. And also, I personally do most of the work in creating my music. So imagine other musicians who have to book time in studios and hire engineers and producers and musicians and rehearse the musicians and tour with the musicians. But because of Factor, these projects are possible, and everyone gets paid in the process. Everyone gains skills. Everyone builds their careers. And in 2019, this money was made available to 2,500 different projects, large and small. Now remember, in Grimes' case, the money did not go to her. It went to Metric's label, Crystal Math. Now maybe you see why it's so frustrating for Elon Musk to take up 25% of the National Post article about this specific grant. Or for Grimes' success to be a source of outrage that the money would be used for Crystal Math Music, a Canadian label. All the articles, all of this outrage is because one person was scrolling through a Factor spreadsheet of 131 pages and saw Grimes' name on a single line next to $90,000 and posted an outrage tweet about it. And then the leader of one of Canada's federal government parties posted this National Post article, which is just riddled with misinformation and opinion. It mentions the name of her child and how well Elon Musk's stocks are doing. All of this is just nonsense. Look, as Canadians, we're incredibly fortunate to have robust funding for the arts, not just from Factor, but from a lot of different sources. But we should also be very careful not to take them for granted because they are not guaranteed. Just 3 years ago in 2017, Bell Media eliminated the MuchFact grant after the CRTC stopped requiring them to make it available. It had been available since 1984, and it helped fund videos by artists like Arcade Fire, The Arkells, Carly Rae Jepsen, Alexis on Fire. And at the time, Bell Media suggested that maybe streaming services pick it up because that's where the videos live anyway. But instead, it's just left a hole in the way that Canadian arts are funded. Now we know that the MuchFact grant helped elevate Canadian artists to an international level of success by funding quality videos, as well as providing an environment for the video creators to get their starts, build their careers, and hone their skills. So with the elimination of such an important part of the way that Canadian arts are funded, it's especially disheartening to see so many people sharing and piling on with misleading and inflammatory information about Factor. And I'm sure that Matt Gurney at the National Post, who doesn't believe that art should be publicly funded at all, is happy to get all of these outrage clicks from all kinds of people who are piling on for a ton of different reasons that don't even agree with each other. But what this is doing is creating a culture where people are frustrated with Factor, or the government, or the arts. But the bottom line is that it's going to erode people's trust in Factor, which is an organization that as artists we're all incredibly lucky to have, and people in other countries often cannot believe that we're so lucky to have something like this. I'm not saying that Factor's beyond question, and they should of course be held to a high standard of transparency and accountability. But almost every case where I've seen people being outraged about this online, they are misinformed, and the information to clear things up is publicly available on Factor's website. And if we're all outraged online and demanding that Factor be held to a high standard of accountability, we should probably hold ourselves to a high standard of sharing information. But even more than that, we should demand a higher standard of accountability from our journalists and our politicians. And I would say a much higher standard than we've gotten from them so far on this issue. We are also incredibly fortunate to have access to something like Factor, but it is not immune to misinformation, as you can see in the comments of their official reply to this situation. And to all of the less established artists who are frustrated because they have not yet received Factor funding, and the application process is difficult, and rejection is very common because it's very competitive. If you had an immediate knee-jerk reaction to this story, I hope you take a second to reflect on that. If you want to learn more about Factor, you can head over to factor.ca and read all about how they operate. I'm no expert. Factor didn't pay me to make this. I don't work for them. I'm just making it because the misinformation is frustrating and damaging. But if you have questions or want to start discussions, I'm happy to reply down in the comments. If you're as annoyed as I am about the spread of this misinformation, Factor could use some support over on their posts. Some supportive comments even would be nice. So feel free to ask questions and demand the best of these organizations. But we should also hold ourselves, our journalists, and our politicians to a higher standard of due diligence, or we may find someday that factor is a distant memory like much fact is.